Thank you all very much for coming. It gives me huge pleasure to be able to welcome our esteemed and distinguished speaker here tonight, Dr. Dimitris Plantzos. It really is an enormous pleasure, and welcome to everybody online too. Professor Plantzos is Professor of Classical Art and Archaeology at the University of, at the Kapodistrian University in Athens, and he is a very distinguished publisher, and huge amounts of work has been done in the UK and in Greece, as well as working very closely with our neighbours across the road, not even across the road, beside us, the Americans at the American School. He is the director of a number of different projects, including excavation projects in Castoria, Greece, and he's a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London as well. He studied archaeology both in Athens and then went on and did his DPhil in Oxford. And I suspect, is that where you and Tyler Joe met? Yes. And he and one of our own very lovely members, Tyler Joe Smith, have also gone on to collaborate on the work A Companion to Greek Art, which was published in 2012, and I suspect is on everybody's recommendation list for their students at university. He is a scholar of many different talents. He, in addition to, I think it was GEMS, did you do your PhD on? He has worked extensively, of course, in excavation, but also is particularly interested in reception studies and also archaeological theory as well. He is working on a number of different projects at the moment, and he's the co-director of Constructing Knowledge in Southeast Europe and the Centre for Advanced Studies in Sofia. And another project that he's working on, which I think is still in progress, is this project on funerary art in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think both of those projects will form part of what you're going to be talking about tonight. As I said earlier on, it's a real treat for us to have you here, and you are indeed very, very welcome. So with that, I would like the speaker to take the floor and give his talk on Greeks, Macedonians, Thracians, and a few others inventing the ancestries in Southeastern Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and of course, the very warm welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here once again, and I'm grateful to you all for attending this lecture in person and online. The Thracian culture is a mysterious one. Its heritage comprises thousands of monuments found in Bulgaria, such as rock sanctuaries, treasures, sacred architecture, and cult practicing sites. Not only are they the manifestation of artistic genius, they also reveal the most ancient system of knowledge known to this day. The statement I just quoted and you see on the screen is only one fragment of a wall panel text on display in one of the partially restored watchtowers present-day visitors can see in Sari Mali Grad, a cultural and historical theme park situated near the village of Belchin in southwestern Bulgaria, approximately 55 kilometers south of the capital, Sofia. Now restored to what many hope is its former glory, the late Roman fortress and its surrounding park have been open to the public since December 2013. Conveniently situated near the nation's capital, amidst a scenic mountainscape leading to some of the country's most popular winter ski resorts, Sari Mali Grad presents itself as a handy tourist destination for day trippers, picnickers, and archaeology enthusiasts wishing to learn more about Roman and medieval Bulgaria.
Lower hand from the audience. They cannot participate. Thank you.
In the text quoted here, however, the country's Roman and Byzantine pasts, exciting as they may have been, are daringly bypassed in favor of an even earlier and therefore more thrilling, albeit less known, genealogy for present-day Bulgaria, that of the mysterious culture of Thrace and its people, the Thracians. While they are at it, the anonymous authors of the informative text also attribute to their elusive forefathers some additional, yet quite surprising achievements. For, they argue, they have good reasons to believe that precisely here, in the lands of contemporary Bulgaria, the famous golden ratio and the constant pi were discovered as early as the 6th and 5th millennia BCE. They were widely used, they continue, in practical measurements and in the making of sacred objects. Denoted by the Greek letter phi, the golden ratio has been described by Euclid and others since antiquity as the ideal proportion between different quantities, such as the sides of the same geometrical shape. On the other hand, the Greek letter pi is a mathematical constant that expresses the ratio of a circular circumference to its diameter, universally known to equal approximately 3.14159, and so on. Such constants, fanatically pursued by ancient architects and their modern admirers, have been thought, both then and now, to express an aesthetically pleasing harmony, a sensibility that the text offers associated with Thracian orphism, the cult of harmony, as they say, which later influenced the teaching of Pythagoras. While using an ancient gold plaque, which you see there, from the Bulgarian Black Sea resort city of Varna, to illustrate somewhat flippantly the Bulgarian origin of the Pythagorean theorem, the wall text from Tsari Mali Grad also claims that design standards equally used in Varna were embodied in the mysterious pyramids of the Giza Plateau. Rather miraculously, therefore, in having masterfully avoided to name either Greece or Egypt, or even Babylonia, which may have been the inspiration of many an ancient astronomer, architect, or mathematician, the Bulgarian informative text has managed to eclipse all more famous and more likely competition for ancient excellence, constructing mysterious Thrace and the Thracians as the primeval cultural ancestors we never knew we had. Not only that, however, dazed by the millennia-long history of those monumental discoveries, the text goes as far as to state that the message of some hidden knowledge has been focused here, inherited from a greater known superculture, which preceded the ones that so far have been considered as the oldest, and which one assumes deserve to remain anonymous. As far as informative wall texts at museums and archaeological sites go, meant to enlighten the public at large on the views, the ideas, and the interpretations specialists working on the exhibit have come up with regarding the material remains on display, the Tsari Mari Grad text is quite amazing. Through a sleight of hand and by quietly transporting the visitor to a late antique fortress in southwestern Bulgaria to a seaside resort almost 500 kilometers away in the northeastern part of the country, the text manages to inform its reader, local or foreign, of the tremendously important ancient people of the Thracians, and furthermore, of the sheer historical fact that ancient Thracian knowledge exercised a fundamental impact on the entire life of ancient communities, all the way back to 7 millennia ago, and yet including the ones who built Tsari Mali Grad. And in order to make their point, the Tsari Mali Grad curators have included in the same room display several panels where the Roman fortress appears to be part, and quite a central one at that, of a mystic system of circles and triangles connecting many or all important sites in the region, from the summit of Cherny Vra to the northwest and Musala Peak to the southeast, to the temple of Mithra and Boshnek, to the northwest, again, the Ryla Monastery and the cave of St. Ivan Rilski to the south, and Urvik Fortress to the north. Now, even for those who, like myself, are not experts in Bulgarian art and archaeology, the idea that sites and monuments are governed by cosmic geometry of right triangles and perfect circles is not quite alien in itself. On the contrary, what is generally known as golden triangulation of landmarks, sacred or golden triangles, and so on, is rather commonly cited both in Southeastern Europe and the rest of the world. In general, subscribers to this secret knowledge maintain that famous landmarks across the globe, mostly man-made, but often not, are interconnected with perfect geometric shapes, often dictated by hitherto unknown or hidden, kept secret, superior cultures, or even extraterrestrial powers. Famously, and perhaps inevitably, such ideas seem to first have been formulated in and about Greece, connecting any classical monument worth writing home about, from the Parthenon and Sunion in Attica to sites and wonders such as Delphi, Olympia, and Minoan Crete, or even the recently excavated Amphipolis tomb in northern Greece, to a spectacular yet ludicrous system of geometric shapes. Even though such theories make no historical sense whatsoever, as they appear both anachronistic and illogical, to say the least, they have been going strong, at least since the interwar years, providing Greek conspiracy theory lovers at home and abroad with something to satisfy their need for the wondrous and the exceptional. A consistent bibliography of the supposed cosmic as well as apocryphal knowledge of the Greeks has thus been compiled since the mid-20th century, drawing from an even earlier fascination with numerology that apparently hit many important Greek architects and city planners in the interwar years. Although the latter, however, who counted figureheads like Konstantinos Doxiadis and Dimitris Plantzos in their midst, maintained a strictly mathematical approach investigating how the use of the above-mentioned constants such as pi and phi defined ancient Greek architecture and landscaping, their younger followers, if we can even call them that, seem to have gone completely reckless, as you can verify by simply reading the passage on the screen, harvested from one recent publication on the sacred triangles of ancient Greece and their well-hidden meaning. Besides marveling at the mere suggestion of a straight line connecting two important Greek sites, or the equally banal observation that triangles, even perfect ones, are relatively easy to spot within the plethora of Greek sites and monuments, this more recent generation of self-proclaimed experts also maintained that such apocryphal knowledge was imparted to the Greeks by sages and mystics, even more ancient than them, namely the Orphics, whose teachings eventually inspired, besides Greece's wondrous architecture and city planning, the wisdom of major Greek thinkers such as the Pythagoreans. Balkan modernity, in this respect, seems dependent on this particular strain of ancient apocryphism, jealously claimed by each ethnicity residing in Southeastern Europe on behalf of its primeval champions, be they Greek, Thracian, or other. In this paper, however, my aim is not so much to expose such vital ethnic or national stories as fabrications or fanciful lies. They are not, because they are part and parcel of the wider nationalist need for narratives of distinction and exception. I do wish, on the other hand, to survey some of these imagined ancestors as historical peoples thoroughly invented and meticulously brought to life by an academic discipline, archaeology, created sometime in the late 19th century with precisely this purpose in mind, to offer the nation the much needed materiality of its remarkable history. We are all Greeks, declared English Romantic poet Percy Shelley in the preface to Hellas, his emblematic verse drama published in 1822. And he went on, our laws, our literature, our religion, our arts, have their root in Greece. Written in Pisa in November 1821, that is only a few months after the Greek revolt against the Ottomans, the fervent text, as well as the equally passionate poem it prefaces, calls for an all-out support for the rebellious ethnic community identifying with the glorious predecessors against the barbarian oppressors, thus casting the ancient Greeks as the forefathers of Western culture, and the present inhabitants of the southernmost tip of the Balkan Peninsula as their legitimate descendants in body and spirit. Among the peoples of Southeastern Europe, the Greeks are therefore perhaps the least to blame for having invented and imagined ancestral culture for themselves, because they were not really the ones to come up with the idea. In our modern world, and following a tradition going back to the Renaissance, if not before, the classical economy of aesthetic values, ethical principles, and social hierarchies based on a religiously preserved canon of text, biographies, and ruins is maintained as an elite, inherently white, and quintessentially male intellectual genealogy. Greece's monumental heritage played an important role in the process of the country's imagining by those who claimed an intellectual and cultural affinity with it. During the 19th century, and as the fledgling nation state was trying to claim its place in the global hierarchy of cultural significance, colonialist notions of Greece as a heterotopia of ruins, devoid of any actual value in and for the present, persisted quite tellingly. Officially dubbed the Hellenic Republic by way of homage to the country's classical past and the Hellenes, its ancient people, present-day Greece was founded at the intersection of the two powerful processes of Western modernity, colonialism and nationalism, as a peculiar inheritor of the classical heritage. This peculiarity, when a nation state is carving its own brand name of imageries created by others in an effort to control the state and its people, is what Michael Hertzfeld and others following him have called crypto-colonialism. In Hertzfeld's original study, published in 2002, crypto-colonialism is defined as the curious alchemy whereby certain countries, buffer zones between the colonized lands and those as yet untamed, were compelled to acquire their political independence at the expense of massive economic dependence. This relationship being articulated in the iconic guise of aggressively national culture, fashioned to suit foreign models. During the later 19th and throughout the 20th century, the Greeks proceeded to their own self-colonization with enthusiasm, both in an effort to convince themselves and others that they were rightful inheritors and worthy custodians of their classical heritage, as well as in an attempt to further modern Greece's diplomatic and political endeavors. The multimodal entanglement of modern Greece's national imaginary with classical antiquity and its material remains, ruins, relics, treasures, has been fully explored by many scholars in the last 30 years or so, including myself. Modern Greece's imagined ancestor, classical Hellas and its material remains, has invariably been deployed as an agent of national cohesion and a paragon of excellence and exceptionality at home and abroad. To illustrate this, I have many times in the past used the example of the Greek passport, decorated with imageries from the classical and post-classical Greek archive as an apparatus for the Greek nations by political mapping and sorting. As I have often spoken and published about this, I will not repeat any of my previous remarks this evening, so don't worry. I will just say that, however, in my view, through the archaeological imageries projected by the Greek passport, the nation is charted as an exclusive, ancient, culture-historical, and hence quasi-biological ontology, whose very existence, as well as incalculable worth, are verified through an impressive monumental heritage. To support this, let me just use one image from our passports, the frontispiece, setting the tone, as it were, for what is to follow, placed right before the booklet's title page. Pericles makes a speech in Pnika, reads the caption to the monochromatic rendition of a neoclassical work by German painter Philipp von Foltz from 1852, now surviving only in copies because it was destroyed in World War II. One is titled Pericles held die Leichenrede, that is, Pericles delivers his funerary oration. The painting, dry and uninspired in its neoclassical verbosity, fails to represent something from the glory that was Greece, if only because Pericles' oration was not delivered anywhere near the Pnyx in the first place, but somewhere in the Kerameikos, where Athens' public war memorial stood. In copying the painting, and while trying hopelessly to rehabilitate it into a modern Greek expression of Hellenism, see the awkward phrasing of the English language title and the insistence of retaining the Greek forms for names such as Pericles and the Pnyx, the Greek authorities confirmed the crypto-colonial commitment. Someone at the police headquarters back in 2006, when the new passports were designed, thought that by copying a boring old scene created by a long-forgotten German painter of the 1850s, they would succeed in making Greece relevant again, especially with a white, Western, presumably well-educated, and hopefully archaeophile audience. The excruciating failure of this effort to appear at once authentic and exceptional is yet another example of what Homi Bhabha has taught us is the premeditated, ironic result of colonial mimicry. The faithful reproduction of notions, ideas, images, and schemes created by the colonist on behalf of the colonial subject only results in what Bhabha called partial representation, at once operating as parody, often unintended, both of the original and its imitation. The Greek state is therefore deploying archaeology in what I have described as an archaeopolitical template. This is a tool for national distinction, cohesion, and cleansing. As I have argued before, archaeopolitics mobilizes archaeophile sentiments in order to manage life in the present. As has also been argued more recently, the Greek nation's systematic association with classical antiquity can serve as a vehicle for achieving a status of whiteness. That is, when a country such as Greece presents itself as the cradle of what the West's white modernity has been known to cherish for so long. Inevitably, such state-condoned and widely supported exceptionalist rhetoric generates suspicious strains of alt-archaeology in the public discourse within Greece, which, although not particularly popular with this country's academia, seems well established within the Greek middle classes. Conspiracy theories involving Greece's antiquity, the nation's exceptional achievements, and its spectacular eclipsing of all others are evident daily, and cyberspace, as elsewhere, has provided an easy access arena for such follies to unfold. Although these developments have yet to be studied in full, it seems that a renewed strain of such alt-archaeology, revisionist and unofficial, was triggered in the early 1990s by the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, the tragic war in Bosnia that followed it, and the emergence of what is now North Macedonia, but at the time claimed to be the rightful owner of ancient Macedonian heritage, a claim Greek nationalism could not stomach. The Socialist Republic of Macedonia declared its independence from Yugoslavia on September 8, 1991. It was then that a rekindling of the old Macedonian question seemed inevitable. Bulgaria openly contested Macedonian national identity and language. Greece resented the appropriation of ancient Macedonian names and the symbols by its neighbor. Serbia questioned Macedonia's religious identity. At the same time, the ethnic Albanians living in the former Yugoslav Republic insisted on being recognized as a distinct ethnic group equal to their Macedonian fellow countrypersons. It was then that Macedonian irredentism was reawakened, and old narratives deploying classical antiquity as part of Macedonian history were given a facelift. Gradually, the concept that modern Macedonians were somehow related to the ancient people of the Paeonians, an ancient Indo-European population that once occupied the lands between Illyria and Thrace, was abandoned. It was replaced with a new, ancient Macedonian identity, ostensibly establishing a direct and seamless continuity with modern Macedonians. A phase of antiquization, and don't make me pronounce this, so an antiquization of Macedonia and the Macedonians ensued, during which it was actively argued that modern Macedonians are not exclusively Slavic, but also ancient Macedonian, that is, ethnically, culturally, and presumably genetically linked to the ancient Macedonians who were not Greeks, according to this narrative, but had their language, customs, art, and culture usurped by the Greeks, both in antiquity and in modernity. Macedonian antiquization, both at home and abroad, in the greatest centers of the Macedonian diaspora, was one of the main reasons, the other being Greek stubbornness, why this new Macedonian question over the name took so long to settle, since no one really believed that a country like North Macedonia could seriously threaten Greek borders, even if it ever wished to do so. If for the Greeks and the Macedonians, antiquization was a self-evident course, others had to try harder. As we saw, modern Bulgarians, for one, or at least some factions in present-day Bulgaria, consider the ancient people of the Thracians as part of the country's national heritage. Like the Macedonians with their tumuli, the Thracians too have a lot to offer to the modern nationalist imaginary by means of breathtaking gold finds, once again coming mostly from burials. Long before the mysterious people inhabiting ancient Thrace became part of a supposedly deeper, quasi-metaphysical narrative reuniting modern Bulgarians with the land they were now inhabiting and the cultures it had produced in the past, Bulgaria had, in true crypto-colonial fashion, adopted for itself an exoticized image of its historical past, thoroughly created by archaeologists and museum curators in the West. The more spectacular the find, the more Thracianized it would become, both during the communist and the post-communist eras, in an effort, as has been explained by cultural historian Ivo Strahilov and many others, to extend the Bulgarian past as far back as possible, while toning down the role the Greeks were often thought to have played in the urbanization and advancement of the land and its peoples back in the day. Bulgarian nationalism is, like its Greek and North Macedonian counterparts, the product of a localist enlightenment project spearheaded by a handful of awakeners, most of whom were Christian clergymen, more or less like Greece. Unlike the Greeks and a few others, however, Bulgarian nationalists chose to focus on their nation's medieval accomplishments, dwelling on Bulgaria's rich history since the 680s CE and its already mythologized succession of khans, czars, and patriarchs, rather than anything predating the coming of the Bulgars into the region. Besides the standard ethno-nationalist narrative for modern Bulgaria, however, a quite separate one was also unfolding, also inspired by the Orientalist, Balkanist ways the West and its elites insisted on viewing Bulgaria and its people, and also enforced by the same limited number of state and social agents. One, appropriating the Thracians and at the same time promoting them as a valid part of a quintessentially Bulgarian past. Ancient Thrace was a vast region whose geographical boundaries varied significantly over time, inevitably viewed through the eyes of the Greeks and the Romans, whose historians and chroniclers became part of the Western literary canon from the Renaissance on, Thrace and the Thracians were deemed historically or archaeologically significant and present only to the extent that they seem to conform with Greco or Romanocentric narratives of Hellenization or Romanization. Opposing this classicalist trend was an equally politicized project of Bulgarian state archaeology to nationalize the Thracians. The most prominent example of this was the state-run excavation of Seuthopolis in the late 1940s, a fortified 4th century BCE settlement architecturally resembling the Greek-based city plan of a Greek city, and its subsequent interpretation as the capital of the so-called Odrysian kingdom, an ancient Thracian state flourishing between the 5th and the 1st century BCE. State archaeologists at the time made a point of denying or under-highlighting any obviously Hellenic features of the find, presenting Seuthopolis and the Odrysian kingdom in general as the products of an indigenous culture rather than as anything that could have borne signs of a foreign and certainly not Greek inspiration. It was through archaeological projects like these that the hitherto elusive Thracians were rehabilitated into a new Bulgarian ethno-national canon, showcasing Thracian excellence and downplaying Greek and or Roman initiative or influence. Initially, the communist regime seemed indifferent, if not hostile, to the Thracians, originally wishing to stress Bulgaria's Slavic origins and thus emphasize its cultural and historical ties to Russia and the Russians. However, by the mid-1960s, and in time for the Seuthopolis excavation to be studied and promoted, the Thracians were rehabilitated into the national narrative, which thus seemed to embrace earlier romantic notions of environmental determinism. It was within this framework that the subdiscipline of Thraciology was formed to provide the emerging socialist republic with a missing link to its imaginary antiquity. Through the rehabilitation of the Thracians, the Bulgarian nation was thus given a suitably dignified antiquity on which to base its intellectual genealogy, at the same time marginalizing any Ottoman or Oriental influences that, although they may have seemed closer to home, they were stigmatized as insignificant, alien, or embarrassingly un-Western. By accepting the Thracians into Bulgarian heritage, Bulgaria, represented by its elites and at least some of its intellectuals, appears to be renegotiating its own Europeanness and, as already stated above, its claims to whiteness. Bulgarian, or indeed Thracian archaeology, undertaken by the state as a rule, shows obvious signs of influence from its narrative. The Kazan Lak, or Rose Valley in the center of the country, for example, where a significant number of burial tumuli and other monuments associated with the Thracians have been discovered, has been dubbed the Valley of the Thracian Rulers by eminent Bulgarian archaeologist and excavator Georgi Kitov. In 2004, it was Kitov again, who excavated a monumental chamber tomb in the same region, which he identified as the tomb of Thracian king Seuthes III, also arguing that a bronze head, shown here, found lying in the vicinity of the tomb, was in fact a portrait of the king himself, coming from a life-size, full-body effigy of him, proudly displayed at the National Archaeological Museum in Sofia today. As a national treasure, as well as a figurehead for Bulgarian archaeology, the tenuously identified head stands as one of the nation's primordial, genuine, and glorified ancestors. Suggestively named the Vault, even though it is not underground, the gallery in which the bronze head is shown is designed for exhibition of treasures, grave goods, and single artifacts of special artistic and historical value from the late Bronze Age through early Iron Age to late antiquity. This is a quotation from the room itself. Besides the Thracians and Thracian culture, the blurb now describing the vault on the museum's website also includes references to the burial rituals of the Illyrians, shiftily managing to avoid any mention of the Greeks or the Romans, even though the inscriptions of which the very identification of Seuthes' tomb and other such important finds was based were actually written in ancient Greek. Persistent claims of such glorified ancient as well as exclusive heritages for the sake of fueling Balkan nationalism backfire into bursts of regional exceptionalism ranging from the formidable to the ridiculous. If Greece threatened North Macedonia with war more than 2 decades because of the latter's insistence that ancient Macedonian heritage was its own exclusive national treasure and actually managed to hinder Macedonian political life for the most part of that time and to the present day, in the public sphere, one often encounters instances of archaeological madness that are indeed impossible to fathom. As I was preparing this lecture, I came across The Archaeologist, a society and culture website hosted on Facebook, featuring a post on an ancient inscription from Italy written in the yet elusive Etruscan alphabet. Although the post itself was quite interesting and genuinely fascinated with the ancient artifact, a throng of web users, mostly anonymous, rushed in the comment section below to express mostly nationalist or exceptionalist views of a remarkably pseudo-historical nature. While a Greek claimed that the lettering on the inscription was, of course, Greek, that is an Etruscan inscription, another user, tellingly identifying themselves as pro-Bulgari, claimed that the Trojan War was in fact fought between the ancient Bulgarians, later called Thracians, with the losers first colonizing Crete and eventually Italy, thus becoming the Etruscans. While others in the same section claimed that the Etruscan script actually derived from the Cyrillic alphabet, another Bulgarian called the Greeks African descendants and hence pathetic beyond tolerable, thus elucidating in this ludicrous yet quite plain way a certain Balkan frustration with appropriating whiteness and therefore Westernness through such desperate attempts at archaeological revisionism. Writing on the state of archaeological research in her native Serbia, archaeological theorist Stasha Babic, in a paper published 25 years ago, pointed out that exceptionalist ideas regarding the people and the land of Serbia came back to the fore at the time of the horrific Bosnian War and its aftermath. As ethnic communities across Southeastern Europe were once again striving to redefine and promote their national idiosyncrasy and exception, Serbian state archaeology was also agonizing to prove that the land of Serbia, if not its people, had been instrumental for the historical and cultural development of the region and of people of Europe at large, at least at some point in its historical trajectory. This summarizes, in my view, the most notable common trend in the cases I'm discussing here, whereby modern nations may be seen grasping at straws in order to prove their historical importance in the present and for present purposes. After all, this is what archaeopolitics is all about. Time and again, for Greece or Bulgaria, Albania, Romania, Macedonia, or Serbia, the local has to appear globally significant. In other words, national histories have to prove their Europeanness, or indeed their Westernness. Otherwise, their very historicity comes into question. Finally, let me just comment very briefly, instead of a conclusion, on two very similar works of so-called socialist art, one Albanian and the other Romanian, displaying the assumed historical trajectory of the Albanian and the Romanian nation, respectively, and thus linking the modern Albanians and the modern Romanians to their respective ancient ancestors. The first, shown here, is a gigantic mosaic decorating the facade of the National Historical Museum in Tirana, built in the early 1980s, combining elements of socialist realism with the primordialist ideas current at the time in order to showcase the historical development of the Albanians. As with many other Balkan ethnic groups, a nationalist renaissance or awakening of sorts also occurred in Albania between the late 18th and the mid to late 19th century, during which people ethnically self-identifying as Albanians sought to launch modern Albania as an independent nation state. In this, the Albanians followed the Greeks, the Bulgarians, and other Eastern European ethnicities in drawing cultural and political inspiration from the Western movements of Romanticism and the Enlightenment. Historically, Albanian nationalism has fostered such concepts as Albanianism or pan-Albanianism, promoting the irredentist idea of the creation of a geographically expanded Albanian state or a greater Albania, envisaging the unification of the lands that nationalist Albanians consider form their primordial homeland, a concept quite close to the Greek great idea, the Μεγάλη Ιδέα. A main staple of any Albanian ethnogenesis narrative and a mechanism for its recycling to the present day has been the Illyrian contribution to the Albanian nation, cultural as well as genetic. As a result, the myth of Illyrian Albanian continuity has become the founding myth for modern Albania and the ideological premise by which to promote an autochthonous, exceptional, and superior Balkan people, notably predating both the Greeks and the Slavs, as well as surpassing their historical achievements in the region. These narratives of autochthony, primordiality, and exception tend to be particularly cycled in the country's recent rounds of diplomatic strife with its neighbors, most notably North Macedonia and Kosovo, as well as to a much lesser extent, Greece. In the mosaic in question, therefore, we see a dramatically poised snapshot of the Albanian people en masse, decisively marching towards their triumphant future, in representation magically reuniting the very ancient with the very modern. Similarly, Romanians were encouraged to imagine their primeval history as a well-defined ethnic group, biologically solid and culturally distinctive through archaeology. The ghetto Dacians were perhaps an optimum choice to be deployed as the Romanian nation's primeval ancestors, since the obvious alternative of the Romans did not quite satisfy the idea of a single national and geographical entity surviving through time. In the interwar years, the parallel cultural political phenomena of Dacianism, also dubbed as Dacomania, and proto-chronism came more visibly to the fore. Proto-chronism, in particular, refers to a cluster of various historical, linguistic, and archaeological pseudo-theories claiming that Romania is the cradle of civilization, that the Romanians are the forefathers of all or most other peoples in Europe, and that Romanian is the source of all or most other European languages. In this framework, the Dacians provided a suitable model of cultural superiority, thus encouraging Romanian exceptionalism against the threats posed by the national exceptionalism of others, and in particular the Greeks and the Bulgarians. In images such as this, this is a mural decorating the blind side wall of a residential building in the Romanian town of Oraștie. And it also comes from the communist era. So in images such as this, we can appreciate how something as antique as well as imagined as the elusive Dacians may be enjoyed as the thing of the present. Such are the nationalist imaginings showcased by the two compositions I'm showing here, more or less contemporary. Through their devised archaeologies, clothing, weapons, tools, gestures, the two murals, like so many others from the region, claim, or rather demonstrate, they show, their makers' exceptional, superior histories. Though antithetic, the two narratives are remarkably similar, elevating this kind of banal archaeology into a public historical mainstay for the entire region. Ethnic or national groups in the Balkans and the fledgling nation states or ethnic minorities associated with them needed to invent their own ancestors by redefining or plainly forging the supposed historical connections with peoples, communities, and tribes already known to historians and also, preferably, to the public at large. This invariably necessitated the historical and archaeological rebirth of an endless series of ancient peoples to be cast as, sorry, it doesn't work, as the modern nation's ancestors from times immemorial. The Greeks, the Macedonians, the Thracians, the Illyrians, the Dacians have been thought to fit the bill in recent Balkan history from the mid-18th century onwards. There have also been others, occasionally resurrected from historical oblivion to be enlisted by modern nationalism. The Dardanians, the Pannonians, or even the Carians, the Leleges, the Pelasgians. Regarding the latter, in particular, known to us almost exclusively through Greek and Roman writings, it is precisely as a counterpart to the Greeks that they have been enlisted in recent Balkan history by modern Albanians, most prominently, to serve as the Albanian nation's primeval ancestors, sometimes in a role parallel to that assigned to the Illyrians, but also sometimes fully assimilated to them. As with so many other such nation-forging myths based on classical ancestry, from the Dacians and the Thracians to the Illyrians, the Macedonians, and the Greeks themselves, for that matter, the Albanian Pelasgian myth also betrays a systematic effort by a newly formed state to safeguard what it perceives as its territorial as well as cultural domain, and a deeper longing for a stable identity in a rapidly changing world where truth and memory are fiercely contested. Such narratives of ethnogenesis are meant, on the one hand, to sustain nationalist claims, and on the other, to feed the exceptionalist discourse, mostly against the overbearing presence of the Greeks. As such, these stories are profoundly crypto-colonial, as the narratives they employ are borrowed from a rather narrow repertoire of myths nurtured by the West as its own cultural genealogy, a genealogy based on the very myths the Greeks and the Romans of the classical age based their own on. A bunch of semi-mythologized ancient peoples, mostly as seen by a handful of Greek and Roman historians. It is the cultural capital invested in these ancient names and their imagined histories and cultural legacies that present-day Balkan nations use as leverage in an effort to establish themselves on the slippery terrain of Southeastern European politics. And it is to this purpose that any effort to systematically manage memory and monuments in these countries is invariably devoted. Thank you.
Don't run away. Thank you so much for that fabulous talk. I, for one, didn't want it to finish. So if you wouldn't mind doing another hour or so, that would be great. It's such an important presentation, such an important discussion to have about nationalism in archaeology, and a massively complex issue too that creates really passionate views from amongst people. And you could see lots of people online already commenting, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. One of my favorite examples, I teach a bit of nationalism and archaeology in St. Andrews, and one of my favorite examples is of the islands St. Thomas and Prince, which are in the Gulf of Guinea. And one of the stamps they have is of an archaeologist identifiable by the pith helmet and magnifying glass and trowel. And this archaeologist is troweling up things like a scarab. In the background, there's some pyramids, and they also find a twerk, like an Irish Celtic twerk. And this is great, except these islands weren't inhabited until the 15th century CE. And so that's some magic creativity going on there. Are there questions from the audience? I'm sure there are, and online too. Nothing? I've got a microphone here. Anyone would like to? Oh, well done. Thank you. Nope.
I can try to project my voice.
But use it for the online audience.
Thank you very much for this entertaining and detailed overview of sort of how archaeology and history gets co-opted by nationalist agendas in different places. I was wondering about the sort of top-down perspective that you've adopted there, sort of exposing how it is the nationalism on the level of people constructing museums, making murals, signposting archaeological sites. How does that sort of affect the reading of, well, the other side of the story, which is kind of would be a more bottom-up empathetic view, because clearly these narratives are meeting the demands of nations that have been marginalized or in a way colonized by imperial powers. Are there any sort of ethnographies of how people actually respond on the ground sort of to those sort of nation-driven, state-driven nationalist narratives? Do they actually just follow what they've been told, or are they actually craving that kind of history, and archaeology, sort of archaeology at large, fails to respond to that need with more sort of real answers and sort of giving sort of real history, and because of that failure gets sort of those made up narratives triumph?
Well, thank you very much. Well, in a sort of a tapestry of almost all Balkan nations, you can't really go into too much detail. As you heard before my talk, I just finished co-directing this project with many Southeastern colleagues, and I had the opportunity to study all that in some detail. As far as I know, Thraciology, for example, has been exposed by many cultural historians, not archaeologists as much, but mostly historians and cultural historians, who also critique the way the Bulgarian state has tried to promote Thracianism at home and abroad through exhibitions, through temporary exhibitions abroad in France, whatever, in the States. They're all of the diaspora. And of course, this rings a bell for me as a Greek, because you can cite case by case an example for everything the Bulgarian state has ever done. There's always a Greek parallel, or perhaps a Greek antecedent, something that happened in Greece 10 years before that. But the problem is that archaeology is entangled in this to a great extent. What surprised me was that in places like Bulgaria or Albania or Romania, these pseudo or imaginary archaeologies or pseudo-scientific narratives have crept into the official academic record. As far as I know, you won't find a description of the holy, sacred Greek triangles in Greece in a Greek museum, as far as I know. Or no one actually teaches them in Greek academia unless you go to a military school, something like that. So this I found shocking in a way. Of course, and I tried to make a point of that, the public can really create and consume these as much as they like, because they're fanciful stories. They're much more interesting than than what I have to say about the Greeks or the Thracians, for that matter. So I can understand how they are staple narratives for nationalism in Greece, in Macedonia, in Bulgaria, in Albania. The problem is, first, that archaeology has no real answer to that. Official academic archaeology cannot really tackle these. And second, and more important, these archaeologists can have nothing to do with present-day politics. You cannot try to resolve problems between states in the Balkans using archaeology, real or fake, sort of academic or not. Those were my 2 points of this lecture. So I'm sure I don't think many people have tried to do an ethnography of Bulgarian pseudo-archaeologies or Albanian pseudo-archaeology. Like I don't think that people have done that in Greece that much. Not an ethnography. You have people like myself saying, "Oh, this is wrong. This is false. This is stupid, whatever." But that would be a good idea. But I still don't know what the point would be. Certainly, the archaeology has to find a way to reply to this.
But I mean, one of the things that was very striking about your paper was the kind of geographical range you were able to bring out, but also the diachronic range. And very similarly in Ireland, you might know this too. In the 90s, I was taught that Portal dolmens were first came from Spain into Ireland, and then Ireland into Britain. The sole reason that we learned all those typologies and chronologies was to show that Ireland actually invaded Britain first. And I mean, now it's all about our connection with Europe. And so the textbooks have changed. I mean, I can see that looking back on it, but at the time it meant much more.
Well, my starting point for this is part of a book. My starting point for this was Michael Herzfeld's crypto-colonialism idea. And he says in his old paper, which was very badly received in this country back in the early 2000s, he says that it's only Greece and Thailand and perhaps a couple of other countries that have never been colonized. But then wherever I go, and now he's convinced that I'm right, wherever I go, I see crypto-colonial narratives. I see this, and people who did not know Herzfeld's paper and work, writing about Thracology and Thracomania in Bulgaria, were arguing that it was the Western, mostly Francophone concept of Thracianism that inspired people in Bulgaria to think of themselves as children of Thracians, not just the Bulgars, but also the Thracians.
It's fascinating.
Thank you very much. That gives a lot of my question would be about what I see as the other side of the coin. I mean, you've illustrated partly how all communities in the Balkans are invested in this effort, in this campaign to claim to something very ancient in their lands, just to target for their target audience, which is the Westerners, whatever that term entails. And so I'm not going to go back to the Renaissance, but maybe to the 18th century with the Grand Tour, when Europe starts rediscovering the Greeks. I'll use Greeks as an example because I know it better, but Mutatis Mutandis show that pretty much it's everywhere the same. And they've tried to figure out what are those newly self-proclaimed Greeks. Are they direct descendants? Do they have nothing to do with ancient Greeks? Have they lost their way? Now they're kind of finding it again. And from modern literature, it seems that they made their minds, the Westerners, that we are direct, at least most of them in the control narrative, were direct descendants of ancient Greece. And so what you've shown about the passports, this connection with ancient Greece, more specifically classical Greece, even more specifically mid-5th century Athens, is the only image recognizable to the Westerners.
One hopes. I don't think
Yes.
so.
And so I wonder if part of the problem, why we're so invested in these narratives about continuity with ancient Greece, overplaying classical Athens, doubling everything else up until 1821, has something to do with the West's inability to comprehend something beyond that for this region. Not probably because of their own narratives that make them draw attention to something completely different and not really pay attention to what happens from 3rd century BC onwards.
Well, certainly, because it is a double-sided coin. The same time they invent us, we invent them, we imagine them, and we think, oh, this is what they want. This is what they know. They don't know this. They know Pericles. They don't know, I don't know, Constantine Palaiologos. So yes, this is a problem, and this is a problem with Greek archaeopolitics. This is what I'm trying to show. And this is why it doesn't work. So whenever you take it out again and try to resolve a present-day issue, like the problem with North Macedonia, the problem with Turkey, the problem with the Parthian marbles, it doesn't work because nobody understands what you're talking about, because the narrative has shifted. And I think we need to do the work once again, because back in the day, I don't know about the Bulgarians or the Albanians, back for the Greeks, it really worked. It was a way for these people, for the travelers and visitors and Westerners at large, to understand that this place, this land is inhabited. They didn't know by whom. I showed you the painting by Church, Frederick Edwin Church. He was an American painter who spent a few months in 1867, I think, in Athens. He came only once, and he did a couple of paintings of ruins. And in this painting of the Parthenon, there is a man, there is a person, a very tiny person, because by the time he went back to his hometown in North America, Church had forgotten how big the Parthenon was or how small. So he drew this, and this man is the custodian. He's a war veteran, put there by the Greek state, and probably they were getting some tips from visitors. And so he was standing there, and the painter had forgotten how big the person was. So he drew him completely out of scale, completely wrong. And I don't know how it took me decades to realize that there was a man in there. I knew this painting, but I hadn't realized. So the ruins were a good way for these people to realize that the land was inhabited, and then they made the connection with the ancient Greeks, and that was all right. And even though the Greeks had a very ambivalent connection with classical antiquity to begin with, then they realized that this was the way to go. It didn't work with Bulgaria. It did not work with Albania, because nobody in the West was asking for an Albanian nation state or a Vlach nation state in those days. It was only the Greeks. So yes, the Greeks took advantage of that. But now I think the narrative has shifted, and it's time we do some more groundwork.
Oh. So it's only for the people online. So as long as you talk into it, we can hear you.
No, use it. Just.
So, thank you very much for your paper, Professor. I understand that you focused on the ways in which ancient, artificially reconstructed genealogies have given rise to inter-Balkan animosity. One question that springs to mind is whether a different, also pre-modern identity has actually acted as a unifying element in the region. Specifically, I'm referring to the common medieval Christian background, which was described by Obolensky as the Byzantine Commonwealth. A neat example is that of the Greek Revolution. So the foreign volunteers fell into two distinct groups. The first one, yes, indeed comprised Westerners who were fascinated by the ancient Greek vision, but the latter group did include people, volunteers from the Balkan heartland, who joined the Greeks in what they understood as a common pan-Christian struggle against the Muslim oppressor. So what's your take on that?
Well, this is absolutely spot on. I don't know if we had this conversation in private, but anyway, I mentioned that this is part of a book. This is chapter 3, Byzantium is chapter 4, because this is very interesting, because this is a heritage you can share, but can you really? And the point of this, the starting point of this book was management of material remains. Yesterday we had the opening of the station Thessaloniki with the Byzantine crossroads, whatever, and it's similar. I mean, word for word copied debate happened in Sofia for the Serdica station. Shall we keep it? Shall we not? And so there's, Middle Ages for you. And next to Obolensky, I would mention the great 2 books by Diana Mishkova, who was the co-director of that project I mentioned so many times already. So yes, but there, the problem with Byzantium is that it is a solid heritage. It makes sense for religious purposes, if not anything else. It's not one you can easily share. It's not one you can actually claim any exceptionalist narratives on it. And if you do, then you go back to the Greeks and the rest, which is more or less like the same thing. And in those days, 19th and early 20th century, I didn't have any currency in the West. So these people felt they couldn't really do anything with it. When they did feel that, post 1990, then you have all the exhibitions, Greek Byzantium, Bulgarian Byzantium, Romanian Byzantium, all that. International exhibitions, more or less copying, repeating the same topic. But it's a valid point, but it's an ongoing quest.
Yorgos, is there an online question?
Well, yeah, I'll go past the 1,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
One of the questions is if you think that in Greece the nationalism is spread in the beliefs of people and science more than in other Balkan regions.
I think there's a great divide, and it becomes deeper. Greek academia, I think, first of all, okay, we're all nationalists. Okay, let me say that, whatever. We all believe that Greece has its own borders today, and all that, and they have to be kept safe. However, this kind of pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-history has not infiltrated Greek academia as far as I know. Those people claiming non-scientific, non-academically sound things about the archaeological record or whatever, they're not archaeologists themselves. They can be many things, but they're not archaeologists, they're not state archaeologists. So the problem is that this divide is becoming deeper, simply because for many years, for many decades, us, the, say, official academics of this state, had ignored this parallel discourse that was going on silently, not in the universities, not in the official record, with little books here and there, little publications here and there. And now we are simply irrelevant. I cannot convince those fellow Greeks of mine that, Alexander was not buried in Amphipolis or Vergina. There's nothing I can do about that. It's too late. We missed our chance.
We have one last question, and then let me
just thinking that archaeologists may not be able to do this because of the very, very hard work done since the beginning of the Greek Republic by the Slovakian.
Yes.
I think that it's in secondary education that you can get the answer to why is this so strong and why cannot people be influenced by academics, because they've spent 12 years in school, primarily and secondary, being taught the principles and the facts that archaeologists and many historians are trying to fight against, not fight against, but
To negate.
go further.
Even though high school teachers are our students, that's a problem. That's a crunch there.
And you also have, I mean, you said it earlier on, this kind of crazy aliens built our tombs fodder is amazing stuff for social media and the current.
But these are circulated mostly by doctors, military personnel.
There's all sorts of like the chemtrail stuff. I mean,
Yes.
where do we get into this? It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the future in terms of the kind of nationalist agenda now that we've got such pressure on environment and with the huge numbers of people that are displaced and what that's going to do in the future. And with that, I think we should thank Dimitris very, very much again. That was one.